Okay, we are off and running. Thank you one and all for joining us online today. And I also want to say a thank you to all those of you who are tuning in to view the recording off of the web later. We took a look at the statistics, say that fast, and we have quite a few people that join in and watch our video later. So we've got quite a following online, as it turns out. Today, we're going to talk about finishing. It seems like whenever we get together, whether it's Tuesday morning or at the meetings, that there's a lot of discussion about what is the finish on things, how do you do it, what happens, and all that sort of thing. So we thought it was time we had a discussion, share some information among everybody about types of finishes, and see what all we can learn from each other. So with that, I guess let me get started by, I get a magazine. Wait a minute, I got to change the view. Oh, it is there. I just don't get to see myself. I get this magazine, and this is the September issue of 2023. And they have a very good article about shellacs and how to use them, what strength to use. They talk about you can buy it certain concentrations, and then if you want to change it, how much alcohol to add to get a different mixture, and then which types of concentrations are good to do what. For instance, if you want a light wash coat to mitigate stain and blotching, you want to do about a half-pound cut. And then they talk about medium cut, what to do for a French polish, what to do for wiping and that sort of thing. And then a 3-pound cut all the way for sealing knots, saps, and brushing. So it's if you get a chance, it would be a good article to take a look at. If any of you are interested, give me a chat and I'll see if I can loan a copy to you or get the information to you offline. So other than that, who would like to start and tell us about how you go about finishing? Everybody's back.
Well, I'll tell you what I normally do if you want.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. To me, I keep finishing as simple as I can. And I typically, after everything is sanded where I want it to, I use the sanding sealer. And I use it right from the can.
A sanding seal?
They call it Zinziger shellac. It's a sanding sealer.
Okay.
I've used that from day one, and I use it right from the can. It could be cut some if you want to, but what I do after it dries, I'm a big believer in rubbing everything out really good between coats of stuff. So I don't use the steel wool. I use these pads. They're the maroon pad, and rub it down real good so it's down up. And then I put it on my well, sometimes I'll use the gel wipe on poly for the first coat. It's easy to work with, doesn't run, and it wipes off real nice. And then after that, I rub out real good again. And then I use only typically one more coat. I'll use the one with the gloss sanding sealer from there. And then after that dries, I let it dry for 3-4 days. Then I buff everything in my buffer. and I do everything that way.
Do you have a Beal system on your buffer, Jim?
Well, Dick, let me tell you, I bought a Beal system probably 35, 40 years ago when I lived in Texas, and before I was even turning, I used to take, and I made a lot of knives. So I had all the wheels, and all the different, like the grits for buffing the handles out, and the metal of that. So it is a Beal buffing system, although I don't have it hooked up. The three of them where you put them in a lathe. I have a separate motor mount on a thing. I buff them all from that. The only problem is with that is I have to buff it to, the motor is 1750 RPM, so I have to buff it at motor speed. But I can keep it moving quick, and I never had any problem with anything burning or burning through the finish at all. So,
Okay,
I've always
thanks.
used that. I even have an internal buffing piece for it. I put on there for the insides of the bowls, and it's worked fine for me. That's what I've stuck with. Plain and simple.
Well, it does work well because your stuff is always very nicely done and shiny and shows well.
Well, one thing I'll say, Bruce, is that I do the shows down here in the Yavapai Hills. We get 2 of them a year. We do, and I know a lot of people are concerned that they see a little scratch or something. I've never had anybody come by and pick up a piece and say, "Oh, I see a scratch in there." But so many of them come through, they'll pick them up and they like to rub their hand over it, and it's smooth. I tell them, pick it up and rub it a little bit, and they get smooth as glass. That's what sells them more than the average person. Has a little teeny scratch someplace and from a sanding, they don't know what that is.
Hmm.
You know, if you go enter a show someplace and look for a blue ribbon, I guess you don't want it in there. But other than that, people don't notice things that the smoothest, they pick it up, they feel it, they notice it.
So you do
So
a couple coats of sanding sealer and then
no, just the one,
just the one.
one sand, one, yeah, rub that down good. And then I put coat. I don't know if any of you use it. It's a set and finish. I've used this just all the way through. It's a gel poly. I get through Klingsport through. I forget the name of the. But where is it? It's a gel. It's a real nice pasty finish. You rub it on, easy to work with. Put that on, wipe it off, let it dry, and if you want a satin finish, you can leave that, put another coat or two on it if you want, and go from there. I know I use that because it's easy to work with, and I'll use a gloss for the final coat. But I don't. I've never had to use 4, 5, 6 coats of thing. I know some guys do it. That's fine, whatever. But I don't. I don't believe it's needed. If your thing is sealed up good to start with, you don't need that much on. The only thing I've ever done once in a while, I had to put an extra coat or two on, is if I turn everything like end grain pieces out of it. So in the very bottom of the inside of the bowl, a lot of times, not the bowl so much, as you get up enough, I do a lot deeper hollowing. And at the bottom of those, sometimes you see it doesn't seem to cover as good. So maybe I'll have to put another coat or so a finish in there at the bottom to keep it look like the rest of it.
And how do you
But
apply
other than that,
how do you apply the coats? Is it a brush or a rag or?
no, I use well for the shellac, the sanding sealer, I use a brush. I use a sponge for all the others.
Oh, okay.
Little sponges, I like those. They work out well. They're cheap and you throw away, So I don't have any questions or anything on it, but that's what I do.
Okay,
What brand of shellac are you buying?
It's the Zinziger. You see it in,
Okay.
we can buy it. It's a sanding sealer, but it's got to be wax free. And that is wax free. Because you don't want to put the Minwax, the poly over a waxed shellac. So you always make sure you get put a wax-free sealer on it.
okay. Any other questions for Jim? Who's next?
I'll talk about something. I saw it on eBay and it had 4 different types of finishes you can use. And this gentleman did all 4, and it ended up that he liked Danish oil the best on his turnings.
I have seen similar comments. A lot of it depends on what the piece is going to be used for. If it's going to be something that's, I'll say, Unitarian and used on a day-to-day basis, then by far I like an oil finish.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to be a showpiece, then people get into more of the gloss and the higher sheen and that sort of thing. The other thing I found out, though, recently that Spence pointed out to me, if you've got an oil finish, you probably don't want to take it to your buffing system because the oils will load up the buffing wheels. And that's not something you want to have when you go to buff your other products. So
You're right about that, Bruce. But if you do want to use that, then you can buy a separate wheel to use only for oils. I haven't talked to very many people that have actually done that, but it's possible. I can't speak from experience because I haven't done it. But you know, it's maybe if anybody has tried it, I'd like to hear what their results were.
Yeah, I use Danish oil a lot and I buff it, and I've never noticed a problem. But I usually wait at least a week on the Danish oil before I buff it, let it dry. Otherwise, when it heats up, you will get some oil leakage.
Danish oil.
Another guy using a lot of Danish oil is Jerry Walters. I think he uses most all the time for all his pieces.
Danish oil is my favorite too, but it depends on the, like you say, the use that the piece that I'm making is going to be put to. Pretty generally, just the sitting around and sitting on a shelf, I'll use the Danish oil. As an alternative, if I want something to dry fast, I use the wipe-on poly. And the other thing is that over my shoulder here, you can see one of those Tolly style beads of courage boxes. And for those, I use the wipe-on poly because if it's in a healthcare situation, that wipes down better than the oil finish does. So that's how I determine. And I've also got some special finishes that I use. One of them is that on that piece, you can see there's a drawing on it, and some of them I use drawings on, and some I do Ken and Kathy, you've wrapped it with fabric. And to seal that up so that you can wipe it clean, I use Mod Podge. Use about 4 coats then sand the ripples out and clean it off real good, and put a couple more coats on. And that gives a real nice, smooth finish to it. And again, in a healthcare situation, you can wipe it down. If I'm going to make something for that's got to be food safe, I've gone around and around on all the arguments about how long you wait and that finishes should be food safe when they're fully cured and that. And what I did was I just got a dedicated finish for stuff that I want to be food safe. And it's this Terra Nova natural oil. And the description on it, and if I'm going to make a platter or a bowl that I'm doing for food safe, the description is Terra Nova natural oil is a blend of pure oils that does not contain any dye, perfumes, or additives. Prevents cracking. Natural oil is FDA approved and certified kosher. Contains no peanut oils. And so I figure if that's all that's all I put on it. If that's what I put on it as a sealer, that should be not only food safe, but kosher. So how much better than that can you get? Jim?
Yeah,
Okay,
where do you
I've
buy
got
that?
I bought it online somewhere. I just,
Okay.
I just ran the search online and it gave me a choice. But I don't do that much. And you see, I got a little bottle and I've used hardly any of it. I'm not a production turner. I don't do that much stuff. I have another product that I got a long time ago on the recommendation of a former Yavapai teacher. And I do things, and a lot of times I'll paint them with acrylics, and there will be a color on them. And a lot of the finishes, like Danish oil, even some of the wipe-on poly, have a slight amber cast to them, and that'll change the color. For example, if I've got a nice blue finish on something, and I put something with an amber cast on it, the blue and yellow makes green, and it doesn't end up anywhere near what I intended. So there is a product called Crystal Lac, and this is an old package of it, and it takes some looking around to do, but you can get a little container of it for around $15. The advantage of this, it is dead clear, transparent. You don't have, it won't affect the color of anything you're putting it over, and it is it's water-based, so you got water cleanup, stuff like that. If that's a concern for you. Generally, it's used by contractors. They'll buy a big 5-gallon can of it to put on flooring, so it's real durable. Again, it's Crystal Lac. And the last thing I use a wax, but I've forgotten the name of it. But the last thing I have is this is a yarn bowl I made for my wife. I made it about 5 years ago, maybe 6, maybe more. And it's got a little decoration. It's got her monogram on it. This I refer to as my naked yarn bowl because it has no finish at all. It's just plain cherry. And what my thinking behind it is, if she's got some wool yarn that she's using in it and feeding it out, the lanolin in the wool will finish off the inside over time, and all the skin oils that you got just from handling it and picking it up and setting it down over time will finish off the outside. And with these, when I make these, I kind of think of these as heirloom pieces that get passed down through the family. And so they're going to be around a while. And I did this kind of just to see how it would work over time, just to rub up the finish on it. And so that's the alternative I've got, is no finish at all. So that's it from me. Any questions?
I have questions about what pieces besides something like that you would choose not to put finishes on, and which woods seem to be better at not putting a finish on. For example, we made some olive pieces recently.
woman
Didn't
does
put
sewing.
any.
If you look, she's got a sewing machine behind her and bobbins on the wall.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, lots.
Yes.
But I just wondered what you choose maybe not to put finishes on for anybody that has made things maybe that are used for eating or whatever.
Well, I've got a very limited experience. I am not the kind of turner who gets a whole variety of woods and can hardly wait to turn a new species to how it comes out. I generally, unless I've got a little accent piece, my preferred wood is cherry wood. I turn most of my stuff out of cherry or maple or walnut. Cherry and maple mostly, just depending on whether which color I'd like for my piece. And yeah, I get real complicated with some of them, because some of them I burn designs on, and then I use acrylic paints to color the designs. So it all depends. And that acrylic paint, I will put the crystal lac over, and if it's a design that's floating in a background of just plain cherry wood, usually I'll burn a design in, so I've got a stop between the plain cherry wood and the painted design, and I'll use an artist paintbrush just to paint up the edge of the painted design. So I have a colored design and on part of it, and then on another part I'll just finish it with the Danish oil, just because I like what that does to the plain cherry. Which doesn't really answer your question, but I don't have much experience,
Yeah, but that's
outside
interesting.
what I do.
It's interesting that you're using two different finishes on a piece, though, because most people consistently use the poly or something on one piece. Using two different kinds, that's interesting to me.
Kathy,
Nick,
I have a lidded olive wood bowl that I did, that when I got done turning it, was just felt very nice, and I didn't put a finish on it at all. And I think olive wood is a very good candidate just to leave natural, the way you end up getting it turned. Because if it comes out smooth and it feels nice, why do anything else?
Dick, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Regarding not putting any finish on, just leave it natural. Would it, areas of high humidity, would it affect the bowl at all? Maybe with warping or, just general appearance? Would that, I know you spend time in Maine, so there's a lot of high humidity there. What's your experience on that?
Well, I don't let it concern me. This bowl here is that stayed pretty round, and it's in Maine, and we haven't been out of the 90% humidity range for practically a month, unless we've had a couple of random days that dip down into the 70s. So Yeah, it stays round. Because I turn dry wood too. If I turn wet wood and it's gonna find its oval shape anyway, it'll do that. So, it just depends on the design I'm making. And I just let it go where it is, but I don't let the humidity concern me.
So if you take that same bowl to from Maine to Arizona, where it's dry and hot, can you expect it to still stay round, or would it change shapes?
My understanding that I apply when I turn is that it depends on how wet the wood is. And going oval is a function of the wood drying out after it's turned, rather than taking it back and forth to a place with higher or lower ambient humidity.
Okay. Okay.
Bruce, can I add something to what Dick previously said?
Sure.
If anybody's interested in making a Beads of Courage container, please do not use an oil finish. As he pointed out, those have to be in the hospital. They have to be washed down. They have to be clean. The best final finish for any Beads of Courage object is polyurethane, because it's impervious to water, alcohol, it's flexible.
No.
All right, wait a minute. Sorry, Ken.
I'm sorry,
There you go.
I'm muted then.
You're good now.
Okay, do I need to reiterate everything?
Nope, nope. You were good all the way up. You were talking about it had to be poly.
Okay, it needs to be poly because it is easy to clean. It's tough. It's a flexible finish, so it will flex with the wood without cracking. Danish oil, walnut oil. I have put poly over top of those and haven't seen any immediate effects. So it's possible you can do that, but just having an oil finish is not the right finish for a Beads of Courage object. You may get away with lacquer. I'm not real familiar with that. Shellac. You don't want to use shellac because shellac is soluble in alcohol. Well, what's in the wipe down in industrial strength hospital cleaning pads? It's mostly alcohol. So avoid shellac and avoid oils. My preference would always be polyurethane for Beads of Courage.
Doesn't lacquer spot with water?
Yes, lacquer I know it'll leave water rings if you leave it in contact with water too long. And that's why I would, if you want to use, I have used spray lacquer to fix colors so they don't run, and then top coated those with polyurethane. So that's an option that I know will work if you have a reason to use the lacquer. But lacquer by itself, you're right. I think it too is soluble. Does anybody else have any experience with those?
I have a tip that Ken gave me that I've incorporated. A while back, not long after Ken and Kathy got here, I showed them how to make one of these Tolly style ones. And the idea behind the Tolly style is it's built around a 6-inch diameter PVC pipe. The section is cut out. So this part is all PVC pipe that's covered with a decorative element. And when I was making them, I was going on the inside and just finishing that up I thought I needed to finish that. And Ken said, it's PVC pipe. Why do you need to put anything on it? You can clean that up just the way it is. You don't need to do that. And so since then, I have been just leaving the interior just plain PVC pipe. And then the other wood sections that I put on, you can see the inside of the bottom there, that I finished just as a regular wipe on poly. But on this one, you can kind of see the what I'm looking at here is the reflection. That's done with the Mod Podge. That's what the Mod Podge over a drawing looks like, and it evens out all of the bumps and crevices and stuff. Okay.
Dick, on that PVC pipe, do you sand it any at all, or just leave it the way it comes?
I leave it the way it comes.
Okay.
I'd like to comment too about the Mod Podge. When Dick showed Kath and I how to do those tolly boxes and used Mod Podge, I knew it was a craft item that people use for, I don't know, a lot of children's crafts for one thing that comes to mind. I didn't know it would be as tough as it is. With enough coats on it, I was surprised to find out how actually tough this material is. Our kids gave us a food tray. They colored the tray and gave it to us, and they coated it in Mod Podge. We've been using that for years. It gets cleaned up every time it's used. And that surface with the Mod Podge is just like it was when we first got it. So I don't know what Mod Podge is made of, but to me, it's a very good impervious material. It surprised me, Dick, but it's working out well.
That's good.
So what if you would use that as a finish on wood? Does it smooth out well?
There's other better finishes to use on wood. I found it just because I was wrapping these in decorated cloth, and it fills in the weave of the cloth and makes it easy and gives a nice flat finish. But the answer is, yeah, it'll work okay, but I can't, there's a lot of better finishes for wood.
With regard to the tray I just mentioned, I don't know how many coats or how careful the kids were with putting the Mod Podge on, but the final surface is a little bumpy. But I have no idea if they tried to sand it, and I doubt that they did. But it still seems to be impervious to water and anything else we've carried on it. I'm not sure I'd want to trust it on wood. Well, as a final finish, I should say, because this tray is Mod Podge over a paper that's glued to wood. So the layering works well.
This isn't really a finish, but those sea urchin Christmas ornaments and stuff, I coated the inside, not the outside, but the inside with Mod Podge, and it pretty much makes the sea urchin not unbreakable, but it's really hard to break.
What I can see on the Mod Podge is it's basically glue. And remind me, Dick, but it seems like we put about 6 layers on the tully boxes. It does say on the instructions that you can apply a clear acrylic sealer over it, but we didn't do that when we made the tully boxes. We started using Kirk DeHere's, oh, what's it called? It's a final sanding solution. It's called, what is it called?
Tried and true.
No, we use tried and true over it, but it's what's the
Oh,
micro-
Scratch free?
scratch
Scratch
free,
free,
yes.
yeah, scratch free. Scratch free works really well for a final kind of sanding layer to point things out before you put a finish on it. Because otherwise, quite often, once you put a finish on and you have scratches you haven't found before, then then you have to sand down further to put that finish on. But by using scratch free, it points it out ahead of time. I think it has like a wax kind of thing in it. And I don't know, have to get the container to see, but what I like about it is because of the wax, you do have to let it dry for a while before putting another sealer on, but I do like the fact that I can see my scratches more, and it does change the wood color a little bit. So if you want to keep it like Dick is with the crystal lac, you wouldn't want to use that, but it's helpful to me to see where my scratches are.
I don't know what's in the scratch free, but Kurt in one of the classes, you know, he's quite the environmentalist and wants to do things that are safe. He took a little bit of that scratch free stuff and rubbed it on his teeth to polish them up and said, see, it's safe. So, now,
I think
I haven't done that and I don't recommend that, but
I do know, I've talked to Kirk about that too, because I think the other commercial equivalent, scratch free is a combination of I think there's some wax and some oil and a very fine pumice built into it. And it may be something, I've never used it, but I've heard of people using something called triple E as sort of a final polish. And I think it's about the same thing, but Kirk explained that since he deals with woods and finishes all the time, day in and day out, he became concerned about volatile elements that could affect his health. So he started searching and came up actually with this formulation, which has no volatile elements in it at all. How you do that with a wax or an oil, I don't know, but he claims that it's environmentally safe, it's okay for your health. And I hadn't seen him rub his teeth with it, but I can see Kurt doing that. But he's very much promoting these finishes that are safer for you as a wood turner. He's also promoting a product called Tried and True. They're varnishes that, again, don't have the volatile elements that are hazardous to your health. We have some, but we haven't tried them extensively, so I don't know how to say anything about that. But scratch free Kathy and I have both used it. I'm pleased with it. I found that scratch free helps if I'm going to use some CA glue to fill a crack. In the past, I've had problems with, the CA will bleed into and leave a stain behind. I've used lacquer sanding sealer before effectively. I've used some shellac before. I started using scratch free. I'll just put some scratch free on around the scratch area or the crack area before I fill it. And that seems to solve that problem too. I exhaustively questioned Kirk, what finishes can go over this? And he said, any finish you want. Somehow this formulation, I don't quite get it, but so far I've not had any reason to doubt that you can't do this. But something about the waxes or the oils, I don't know if they dry, but they have not had any adverse effect on any finishes I've put over top of them. I think Kathy's experience is the same. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy. So scratch-free has become one of our useful tools in the shop.
It does say on the container that it's wax, oil, and superfine abrasives. It does say that if you're using a lacquer-based finish, you should remove the wax before applying it. But my experience with scratch-free is if I let it cure for 2 or 3 days before putting my finish on, I haven't had any problem with it. But you can feel the waxy finish on it. I just let it set longer and I've had no problems.
That's my experience as well.
I have a question on the scratch free. I use a product called PETA, and it's kind of the same thing. It's a waxy base with pumice in it, and but it tends to darken the wood when I apply it. And I was wondering if scratch free has any effect on the natural color of the wood when you put it on.
It seems to depend on the wood you're using. On some of them it does. Others, I haven't noticed a big change in it. So I think it depends on how much the wood fibers actually absorb the oils and things in it. Ken had a piece with London plane tree that totally darkened once the scratch-free went on. But other woods, I haven't seen much change. So I would sample a piece of wood area first just to see what it does.
So do you
Yes,
think?
I have had it darken, Rick, and what I've done is if I intended to use it only around a crack that I'm filling and it darkens and it doesn't go away with time, I'll go ahead and use a scratch free on the entire object. And that way it has a uniform coloring before I put a final top coat finish on it. But Kathy's right. Some woods, for some reason, don't seem to darken. Others, like she said, this London plane, which is a type of sycamore, that darkens significantly with the scratch free.
So is that something that's going to help stop the CA glue from staining or causing problems?
I found
Yes.
it was much better than lacquer or shellac, either one, because I still had bleeding with the CA, but with the scratch free, I haven't had as much of a problem at all.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've
see,
always-
that's what I use it for now.
Okay.
And
I've
it's
always,
great on,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go-
I
I
was gonna
just-
say it's great on your lathe bed too, because it keeps it oiled.
Yeah. Because I've always had a problem with every time I apply a piece, a little bit of CA glue on a piece, it always seems to darken it or stain it. And then you're sanding forever to try to get the stain out of it. So you're destroying what you've originally done. So, yeah.
That's been
That
my
sounds like-
experience too, Steve, and that's why I'm now using this scratch free before I use any of the CA.
That sounds like good stuff. Is that from Craft Supplies?
Yes,
Yes.
that's Craft Supplies, and the Dr. Kirk in the name is Kirk DeHeer. He actually worked with a company to formulate this specifically so he could get rid of all the unhealthy parts.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I guess I have some questions. I'm relatively new. I've only been doing wood turning for probably 3 years, 4 years, and I found my best finish I get is out of friction polish, and I've tried the wipe-on polys, and the satin isn't too bad. But every time I've ever tried to use the gloss, it seems like it leaves puddles or something. I leave the lathe running while it's on. I let it sit there and run for an hour or two, but it always seems like it leaves ridges, or am I putting it on too thick? Am I expecting too much from it? Do I need to be a little bit more how do I want to say it? More coats, less on, more coats, instead of trying to get a big coat on at one time? Is that what my problem is?
Steve, based on my experience, it could be also the brand you're using. I used let me think now. I believe it was a Watco brand wipe on poly. And Watco is a good quality finish brand. And I kept having terrible problems with finish. And Gary Frank has used wipe on polys for years and swears by it. So I went to him one day and I asked him, what am I doing wrong? He said, bring your can over with you. And I did, and he picked it up and he shook it. And then he handed me his Minwax brand can of the equivalent, and I shook that. And the Minwax was like water, and the Watco was like a thick syrup.
Right.
I changed to the Minwax, and all those problems went away. So it could be the thickness, and it's odd because on the instructions for the Watco, it says do not shake the can.
Right.
On the instructions for the Minwax, it says shake the can before you use it. I don't know what the formulation difference is, but I found a significant difference in changing over to Minwax. It could be because it's thinner. It could be because it's a slightly different formulation. I don't know the answer, but you might try, if you're using a different brand, try using the Minwax before you give up on the polyurethane.
Okay, because I think I am using Wadco. So, but like I said, you know, my satin seams, I have no problem with it. It's just a matter of me having patience for it to cure. You know, sometimes I don't have, you know, the ability to leave something on my lathe for 3 or 4 days as I go through the process. So I'm always, I hate to use the analogy, but I'm not necessarily in a hurry, but I have to be very timely when I'm finishing, because like every day when I get done, you know, I, with it being in the RV, I have to cover my lathe because of any chance of rain or anything. And so I can't leave things on the lathe, so I have to take it off. So everything doesn't always dry like I would like. So I've ran into that problem. You know, if anybody's got any ideas for me, I would, you know, like I said, I've been more successful with the friction polish because it's quicker. I can put like 4 or 5 coats on, and it looks pretty darn good. But it's not always as shiny as I would like. But you know, anything that can help me, I would be great.
You might be putting it on too thick. If you're putting it on while it's on your lathe and you're running the lathe for 2 hours, that's way too long. I put mine on when I do it on the lathe, and I don't always do it that way. When I put it on, I usually don't run the lathe more than 15 to 30 minutes. And it's at a very slow speed, so if there's any runs, they all blend together.
Right.
And I've never had a problem with that. But 2 hours or more, no, there's something wrong there, Steve.
Well, I know when I first started, you know, there was, you know, a group of guys in the wood shop that I was learning at. They had a mechanical where they'd taken a small fan motor or something. They built their own mechanics, and they would put their finish on, and they'd let it sit there and run for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, and that they felt that was going to give them the best results. And obviously, you know, how do you want to tie up your lathe if you're working on several projects? You know, you want to put a coat on, you want to go to the next project. Well, you know, if that lathe's being tied up for 2 or 3 hours, like I've done in the past, you know, you're sort of standing there watching paint dry type of thing.
Yeah, again, I think that's way too long. If it's a separate motor, I can see why you could walk away from it and not worry about it. One other option you may have is how many chucks do you have? Because you can have more than one chuck. You can have an object on one chuck, turn it, put the finish on it, actually take the chuck off, set it aside, and continue to use your lathe if you have more than one chuck.
Right.
Kathy and I started doing that because she would use the lathe for something while we were sharing a lathe, and I wanted to use it. We'd have to move it back and forth. And she quickly wanted her own chuck. It worked
Yeah.
out well. So as long as you leave it on the chuck, you don't have the problem of alignment. As soon as you take it off the chuck,
Yeah, you're
lost
shot.
that alignment.
Right, yeah, you're shot, yeah. Because the odds of getting it back onto that chuck in the same spot is
It's
gonna
nil.
happen. Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's interesting because all of you that do the finishing on the lathe, I have an old Lazy Susan that I covered with aluminum foil. And I just take my piece off the lathe, set it on the Lazy Susan, and most of the time I use a spray lacquer. Now I've got a similar experience that you have, Steve. If I use a semi-gloss, it coats, or a satin, it coats very well. If I try to do a full gloss lacquer, then I gotta watch and be very careful because I'll end up with runs and
Right,
things that I don't like.
yeah,
But I just spin the Lazy Susan and apply the spray and then let it stop and let it go from there.
okay. So do you feel,
I'm sorry, I don't remember the reason for it, but Gary Frank always said, go ahead and put 2 layers of the gloss first and then in with satin, or vice versa, because
Satin, he
they
does
are
satin.
different. Satin
Sorry, Kat,
first.
he does satin first and then gloss if he wants a deep shine.
Okay, but do they dry differently? Is that part of it, or it's the shine that he's doing that for?
He's doing it
Bruce,
for shine.
I would disagree with you. Gary told me just the opposite of that.
Oh, did he?
Yes.
Maybe I'm wrong. I'll check with
And
him.
I'll give you the reasoning he gave me, and maybe I've got this screwed up. He'll put clear on first for 1 or 2 coats, because then it's not obstructing or changing anything from the color or appearance of the wood. But he doesn't like the shiny plastic look of the gloss as his final finish. So he then puts the final coat or coats, I don't know how many he uses, of a satin. And the reasoning for that is the clear has nothing in it. The satin has very fine particles of silica in it. And his reasoning is that if you start out with the silica, you're going to start to build up this a coat of he says it kind of muddies the appearance. And then when you put the clear on it, you don't change that appearance whatsoever. So he does the clear first, finishes with the satin, so it tones down some of the glossiness and still allows the beauty of the wood to shine through. That's the reasoning he gave me.
That kind of falls in line with John Armstrong. He said anytime you have to shake a can to get particles mixed up and whatnot, you're going to lose depth of your wood. And so putting clear on first makes some sense, and then just top coat it to knock the gloss off. And Bruce, I've got the same thing. I bought a cheap Lazy Susan and I put it between 2 pieces of birch wood, but I have a crown stapler. So I shot a whole bunch of crown staples on my top layer. So whatever I'm spraying on the Lazy Susan sits on the nails, and I don't have to worry about sticking to anything on the board or whatever. And my board's getting more beautiful every day.
I use my broken bandsaw blades and take about a 8 to 10 inch piece and bend it to a V, and I set my piece on top of that.
that work?
Anybody want to talk about the high-speed friction polishes? I haven't used them yet, and the pieces I've seen seem to have very fine lines in them, like a phonograph record would, especially near the very center on the bottom. I was just wondering how anybody deals with that.
I started out using friction polish, and John Armstrong just kind of pooed that. But opinions are like keisters. Everybody's got one. I never had that. It was, I think it's not McGuire's, it's Mahoney's friction polish. And that stuff, I had a nice gloss, and you can rev the lathe up after you've got it coated for a bit. And I loved it, but I don't have any experience on longevity, but supposedly it doesn't last as long. I don't know, but the finishes I was getting didn't have excuse me, didn't have that. They just buffed it with a paper towel, or I've got some blue towels that are more, have some fiber in them, and that seems to blend everything. So, but I used to love it. It's easy, but now I'm doing mostly lacquer.
Dan, I started out using McGuire's friction polish on pins. And that's the only thing I've ever actually used it on, with maybe one or two minor exceptions. But I generally don't use the friction polish on a bowl or any other object. So I can't speak to whatever lines you're seeing, but that may or may not be sanding. Either two things come to mind. One is you've seen sanding scratches coming through the finish, or you're seeing the fibers of the paper towel that have been embedded in the finish as it's drying. And I can't speak to that for anything other than on pins. For pins, I've never had a problem with that.
I don't use it because almost everything I have has texture. You know, I either carve it or something, and you can't use anything
friction
like that
polish.
on it.
No, you
No.
can't.
No, so I tend to stick with oil. A piece I'm working on right now has a painted surface, a wood burn textured surface, and a natural surface. And the oil it's just easier to deal with. Wipe on poly on those other surfaces tends to build up in the crevices. The oil
can't do
would
it.
too, but you can wipe it out. You know, wipe on poly dries too quick. So I don't use the friction polishes, but I've noticed on other people's pieces.
Okay, well, it's time for me to chime in just a little bit. And all of the products that have been mentioned, I've had moderate or better success with. Tongue oil, Danish oil, walnut oil, kind of depends on what kind of finish I want, what it's going to be used for. But another reason is also how fast do I want to finish to be done. So the walnut oil is great, and I finished that up with a walnut oil and wax that has carnauba wax and beeswax mixed in with it. And that works really great, but it doesn't give me any kind of a shine at all. But it does give it a nice finish. Wipe on poly is great, and high speed friction polish again. They're good finishes. Zenzer is good, but if I want a quick finish, something that's going to dry fast, like Bruce talked about, the lacquer. And I too have a Lazy Susan that I bought from thrift store for $3 or something, and I do that too. I put it on the Lazy Susan and just spin it around and spray it. It does work very well. That's only if I want to finish quickly. Shellac is a nice finish, but again, what I'm using it for. But I have a new favorite, and I've shared this information with some other Woodturners in our club, and that is General Finishes Armor Seal. Here it is right here. This is oil based, and this one in particular one is a gloss. You can also get it, I think, in semi-gloss or satin, but I really like this product. There's only one drawback for me, though, is the curing time in between sanding coat. The first coat I put on, it was kind of rough, and so I sanded 400 grit and then put another coat on, and then you have to wait for a while. You can't do it right away. So like Ken had already described, if you have multiple four jaw chucks, take it off and set it aside and then go work on something else. So that's what I've been doing. This last piece that I had done, it has 7 coats of, this is a little small bowl. I don't know if you call it a bowl, tray, or whatever, but has 7 coats of that armor seal on it. But I really like it. It's gave it a really nice, I don't know if you can see it there, but a nice finish on it. And after the first, I think 3 coats, I was not happy with it, but I kept on going on to sanding and then do another coat, and by the time I got to the 5th coat, the shine started to come through, and I was very, very happy with it. By the time I got to the 7th coat, though, it was far superior than any other finish that I had used and had done. Another little project was this little tiny bowl, scalloped edge on it. And I took this to Tuesday breakfast yesterday to show it off to people. So this particular one, the finish was real nice on it, but you could feel some tiny little grits in it. Not much, but I put it on my Beal buffing system. Oh, and there's a little bit of story about that. I have a Beal buffing system that sit in a box for about 1.5 years. And Spence and Bruce came to my workshop last Friday, said, we're gonna get you going with buffing. And so they did. They came over and showed me how to use it. And so yesterday I did buff this, and the finish on it's beautiful. So that's my experience with and again, this is my new favorite, Armor Seal. So if anybody else has any experience with Armor Seal, I'd like to hear about it. What I also sometimes, not always, but sometimes when I finish with a project like this, I will, as a final coat, use some wax. I use a Renaissance wax, or sometimes just simple men wax. Just put it on there and rub it off, and it gives it that final finish on it that helps protect it.
Yeah, I just want to add to General Finishes. They make quite a few products that are excellent. They have a wood ball finish that is an excellent high quality finish, and everything General Finishes makes seems to be very high quality. I've used that same Armor Seal both in semi-gloss and gloss, and like Mark said, other than the length of time to dry and recoat, it's really good stuff. It's some of the best the best poly I think I've ever used. And I think I've tried them all, or most of the name brands at least. Other than that, I've got a method that I think is, at least for me, it's foolproof. And you don't hear foolproof a lot here, but you know how you can go to the store and buy a pizza and take it home and bake it yourself? Well, I do wood turning and I finish everything and sand it, and then I give it to its new owner and tell them they can finish it any way they want. And they want to complain about the finish, you know, no problem.
Wrap it up like at Papa Murphy's and give them options. How many minutes?
Do you give them cheese and red peppers with those?
That's extra.
I'd like to chime in if I could. This is Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Gotcha.
Okay. I used to have a shop where I restored antiques. Although in all the years that I had the shop, I saw very few real antiques. But I was buying a lot of poly, 5-gallon cans of it, gloss, semi-gloss, flat. And I was going up to the distributor, buying them because I had a big spray booth. So after I would restore a piece, bring it back to natural, put it in the spray booth, seal it, spray it, whatnot. A company rep who was a chemist called me and said, I'd like to come to your shop. I'd like to see why it is that you're buying so much gloss. And I'd like to see how you're putting it on and what's going on. I said, hey, absolutely. If you're going to come up and help me figure out how to do this, I'll be happy to hear you. So he came in, nice guy. And he said, there are so many factors when you're putting on this poly. For instance, what's the wood? How much sanding did you do? Did you do even sanding? Is it sanded the whole piece the same? Did you blow it off? Did you seal it? Did you seal it evenly? As you know, the sealer can go in one area a little more than another area. It's like color going in a little one area and in another area. Did you put gloss on right afterwards? Let me explain to you. This is him talking, not me. In the factory, we only make gloss. When we sell semi-gloss and flat, we put an additive in to tone it down, an additive that you can buy, by the way, and put it in yourself. There are more, well, I'll call them particulates, heavier particulates in gloss than there is in the other two. So when you put gloss on, it's heavier, and it may not necessarily go into the pores like you want it or flow out smoothly. So if you took semi-gloss or satin mostly, and put a coat on of satin, it's more like water. It will flow evenly into whatever you're putting it on. And somewhat even out where you made a mistake when you were putting in the sanding sealer, where you made a mistake on the sanding. It'll somewhat even the whole thing. So you could go from the water satin to, if you wanted to, the semi-gloss, and then to the gloss. Now, I know that's a lot of work, but if you're trying to get an even coat, he was trying to explain to me that just going to gloss might be too heavy for what you're putting it on. You have to understand what you're doing when you're putting this stuff on, when you're preparing the wood and finishing it. There ended the lecture.
People are talking about wax. This is the product that I've been using. It's an archival wax. You can get it either clear or in various tints. But I don't put much wax on stuff. And when I do, I don't have a Beal system or anything. I just use a shoe brush, just kind of brush it up, and it just it brings it up a little bit, but it's enough for me because I don't work with real glossy surfaces anyway.
When I do pens, I always seal them with CA glue. I like that hard finish on the outside. And then you get that and then take them to the Beal system and buff those. Shines, smooth finish, feels nice to the touch. And I think that sets the pen off very nicely.
This is similar, Bruce, but instead of taking it to the Beal system, I just rub a paper towel on the white diamond stuff and then hold that up against the pen while it's turning on the lathe, and it works really well. That's about all I do with them. That way I don't have them, flipping around. I don't have to hold that little thing up against it.
Question for you, Bruce. What viscosity do you use? The thin, medium, thick? What do you use?
I use thin. I find it spreads a little finer. And I've gone to using now, boy, for those of you that used to work in offices with administrative assistants, that little rubber finger you put on their finger to go through and thumb through pages? Put that thing on, put a cloth over the top of it, put the CA glue on, wipe it on the pen. The CA glue won't stick to that rubber finger. So that makes it a lot easier, and I don't go through anywhere near as many latex gloves or vinyl gloves.
I tried using the thin CA glue and it dried before I was finished. And like you say, it just stuck to the paper. So I stopped using CA glue as a finish.
I use a cloth, cut a little square piece of cloth, put it on that finger and put a drop of CA on, and I'll get about maybe the bottom part of the pen piece done, and then have to reapply CA glue to do the top part. And I'll run the lathe somewhere around 200-300 RPM is all.
Sometimes I use a product called Aussie's oil. Barry uses it quite a bit. Aussie, just like it sounds, I guess from Australia, I'm not sure, but and that works pretty good. It only takes a drop. Just put it on that paper towel and put it on, and works really well. But I'm gonna have to try your trick with the I don't know what you call that finger thing. See how that works.
The fickle finger of fate.
Right.
Yeah. Now somebody sells silicone fingers, and I don't remember where I got it, but I've got a couple of them.
I think those finger things are called finger cots, C-O-T. But do you use smooth ones or nubby ones?
I think the answer is yes.
Well, I used to handle a lot of cash as cabin skeet chairman of the gun club in Wisconsin, and I was handling all this cash. And one of the tellers at the bank that I was depositing said, "You're using your fingers with that? With the money, I guess, is a terrible thing for either being exposed to some drugs or germs or whatever."
It
So
is.
she gave me a bunch of these finger cots with nubbies on them. So I always call it I'm practicing safe counting, but it even went faster because I didn't have to keep wetting my finger to get the bills to separate. So
It looks like they're called finger cots, and you can get them at places where they have sewing supplies, or on Amazon for $9 you get 24 pieces. And they come
Wow.
in 3 sizes.
I would suggest you look carefully before you buy. Finger cots also are sold as a medical supply item, and it's like small condoms for your fingers. And so they're very thin. You could use it for this application. It's a one-time use, but you also want to make sure you get a size big enough for your finger.
Right.
So be careful what you're buying. And I think the finger cots are slightly, that may not be the name for the rubber finger item you've described that you use for.
You went mute for some reason, Ken.
I'm sorry, I had to kill a phone call. Finger cots, I think, are the medical term for those thin items. I don't recall the name of what you've described. It's a thicker, sometimes has a nub on it, usually fits over a finger or a thumb, and it's much, much thicker. That's something you'd probably find in an office supply store.
Yeah. The thing on Amazon says finger protectors, silicone finger covers. You're right. I see the other things, the finger cots, and that's just like a latex glove that slips over. So.
If I can, I'd like to back up to a comment Dan had earlier. Dan, you were talking about you have objects that you carve, you've got natural edges, you've got multiple surfaces, and I would agree with you that an oil is probably a good finish there. One other alternative you may consider is a spray lacquer. And it depends on the final use of your object. But I've gotten to where I will use spray lacquer that on objects that have a lot of crevices. For example, this has a large number of crevices. I wouldn't use an oil on it. I wouldn't use a wipe-on poly on this because the crevices are going to hold it, but a spray lacquer will get into there and protect the wood, and it seals the India ink so they won't run. And I have used also a spray polyurethane on top of something like this. So that's another option. Rather than wipe on poly, you can use a spray poly as a final coat if you want. So Dan, in your case, you might use a Danish oil or something, and still, once it's cured, I think you could top coat it with either a spray lacquer or a spray poly.
Ken, I got a quick question for you. You talked about earlier that scratch material or the paste that you use. What was it called again?
Scratch free.
Scratch free. Okay.
Kathy has it shown right there. Dr. Kirk's scratch free. It's sold by Craft Supplies.
Okay.
There's the finger. This is my wife, so it's a small one. I only go on my little finger, but they make bigger ones.
Right.
And
Yeah, I just got an email that Craft Supply is having free shipping until Monday, the 22nd. So if you want to order anything from them, now's a good time.
Kathy mentioned that the scratch free is also useful for cleaning up your lathe bed. I wouldn't buy it for that particular reason, but it works. I've had it available. We did some green wood turning and it was starting to leave some rust stains in places. So I had a can of that close by. I used that and some fine grit sandpaper and cleaned it up very nicely and left behind an oily, waxy, smooth surface. I normally use just a cheap Johnson's paste wax for that, but in a pinch, the scratch-free works too.
One of the other things I've heard, there's a way to eliminate the bristle brushes in your finish. You know, when you try to paint something on. Easiest way to do that, let's see how I get this, is get one of these brushes. It's kind of like a basting brush, silicone. You don't have to worry about leaving bristles. It smooths out brush marks very well. The only thing I would recommend is don't clean it and put it back in your wife's kitchen drawer.
I know Ed Jones used to use those a lot. He had several in his workshop and actually handed some to me one day and said, this will be better for gluing. So
They do sell those as glue brushes too.
What else do people have this morning they want to talk about?
Bruce, I have a question for people who have used the BO buffing system. I've used it for a number of years. I do actually turn it at higher speed than I know you do, Bruce. The manufacturer recommends 1800 RPM, and I've always used that. But what I've found is that it comes with carnauba wax as your final wax coat. And I've found sometimes by using that wax, it ends up feeling, I guess no better word than to say waxy, where I want a nice smooth feel. I don't know if there's some other kind of wax I could use as a finish coat, or if I'm applying too much at that stage. Does anybody have any suggestions for how to leave the final finish waxed, but feeling very smooth?
Beal recommends when you use the wax and you apply wax to the wheel, no more than about a half a second is all you want to contact the wax to the wheel. I've not had the issue with it building up the way I use it. And you're right, you and I turn at different speeds. I turn a little slower speed, about 750. And I do that because on the varnish that I use, I've had times when turning faster, the finish heats up and it goes to an orange peel look because it softens it and starts to move the finish around. So that's why I go down to 750, don't press so hard. And for me, that's what works. But you're right, Beal recommends 1800. But as to a different wax, I've got a separate wheel that I use a Johnson's paste wax on. But I don't know that I would recommend that over the carnauba wax.
I do very lightly load the wheel with the wax. So I'm barely touching it. I try not to overload it, and I have used some sandpaper on the wheel to clean it up before, but I still end up with, it's not as smooth of a final finish as I would like to feel. And it's sort of like what Jim was talking about. Pick it up. If it feels nice and smooth, and it doesn't matter sometimes what some of the details are, it just feels good. and I'm losing some of that, and I don't quite know why. I might try turning the speed down as you do for that final buffing, and maybe that will work. So I have to get back to you on that.
What if you would just stop after you do the white diamond?
I have done that and I was happy with it, but for some reason maybe I just feel like I've got the system, I've got 3 wheels, I should use all 3. I don't
No
know.
sense wasting that third wheel.
Yeah. By the way, a word of caution too for again, things like what Dan's using, where you've got a lot of crevices or different edges and natural edges. You may not want to use the BO buffing system. I've had to use a toothbrush to clean out white diamond particles and triple E particles out of crevices because they inevitably get stuck in places I don't want them to stick. You just have to be careful what you're buffing. If it's a nice smooth surface, no problems. If it's got crevices, there could be problems.
It's called an effect.
Is that a feature?
Yeah, a feature. Okay, anything else anybody has this morning?
I've got something to show and tell. I'm
Good.
sitting in a different place here and looking over my shoulder, I realize I have a piece that I got from a friend. I didn't make this, but it's cool and I thought you might like to see it. This is a moon in a moon, and ordinarily you see them in little or a Chinese moon. You see them in smaller sizes. This guy, his name is Paul Hedman, does large ones up to 1 foot in diameter, and they're a piece within a piece. So I just wanted to show you because you're not likely to see one of these somewhere. They don't. Yeah, a few people do them, but yeah, he's the guy who does them. So that's what I got.
I have seen those, particularly having been in China, I'd see them quite often. And I've looked at them, I've seen the tools it takes to make them, where they do 7 and 8 different balls within a ball. And it's kind of like a lot of times attending some of our demos. I love to see the demo and see how it's done. And now I know I never want to try it.
Yeah, me neither. He makes his own tools. The only other thing I'll say about this is if you look at the finish, he sandblasts stuff. And so that while it's not an applied finish, actually it's a subtracted finish. And yeah, that's an alternative with something if you can work on a design that has sandblasting and you've got a sandblasting cabinet.
Yeah, and it's not all smooth sphere diameter either. He's got texture on the outside of that thing.
Oh yeah, he cars it.
Yeah. That's a lot of work.
So Dick, how did you acquire that?
He's just a friend online that I met at a symposium that I went to, and we swapped.
Ken's got something he's trying to show.
There it is.
Some of you may have or may not have seen this book. It's by David Springett. I believe he's from England. And he does these Chinese balls and spheres. And this book explains how to actually make your own tools to be able to do this. I found it fascinating, but I'm not ready to try it.
Me neither.
It's a very, very complicated process. So I'm glad, Dick, that you know of somebody who's actually done it, larger scale. And on these, I think the largest object on here is about a 3-inch diameter. So everything is on a very tiny scale. I'm amazed that he can do that. So if anybody in our club ever does that, let me know. I'd like to see how they do it.
Anybody's inspired, the library has the book and the video, so you could go step by step.
There you go. We need a volunteer to try it.
This is one of
Actually,
those times.
Paul, who made that, lived in Prescott during the 80s, and he likes Prescott. He might come down and do it, but I wouldn't. But he's not a regular demonstrator.
This is one of those times you want to be careful when somebody says, we need a volunteer, please step forward. You want to make sure everybody around you doesn't take one step back.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
All righty. Just as a heads up, we've had some discussion, and next month, we're going to try chips and grits on a Thursday. This time interferes with wood turning class, and there are several members that are involved in helping out with that, as well as some of the members in the class may want to join and dial in as well. So we're going to try it on a Thursday morning next month. So watch for the announcement, and we will go from there. Any other words?
Which Thursday do you think you'll be targeting, Bruce? Because you realize the second Tuesday of the month is always a Woodettes meeting.
Yes. Well, that was a problem when Kathy was the note taker. Now that we've gone to recording, I was thinking we would have them both on the same day.
Yeah, I won't be here anyway. I'll be at Club Camp with Nancy Hall, so it doesn't bother me either way.
Okay.
And besides, Woodettes starts later in the day. I can always leave early if I do watch some of it. So
Right.
not to worry. And then I don't have PAW 3 days in a row, only a couple days that week.
Right. So we free up a day for you.
Yeah, there you go.
So Bruce, we'll tentatively put it on the 12th of October, that
Correct.
Thursday.
Correct.
Same time, 8:30.
Same time, same bat channel, whole thing, right? All righty.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. See you next time.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Take care. Thanks for the info. Thanks
Bye.
again, Bruce.
Goodbye, all.